When I was a teenager, I could not wait to have the keys to life, the keys to freedom. I wanted the keys to the car. I was very rebellious. I wanted that car. I wanted to get away from the religion I grew up in. I wanted to get away from some of the family stuff I was involved in. I could not wait. Give me the keys and have a nice day. So then I proceeded to go out and to drive my car around. Now, I think the best visual I can give you is in the movie The Blues Brothers, when those guys are tearing around the mall. Do you remember that? They're in their car, the police are chasing them, and they're busting up Toys R Us, and they're taking out the popcorn stands, and they're busting through windows, and they're destroying this entire mall. And people are running and screaming in all kinds of directions. If you'd known me back then, you would have been one of those people. Because I took my car and I ran it all over the place, on sidewalks and yards. I terrorized family, I terrorized friends, I terrorized entire communities. And I always had people chasing me, debt collectors and cops and probation officers and school principals and all kinds of things like that. But because, like all of us, I have a conscience, and because, like all of us, there's that sense within us, and this is one of the things that I think is most beautiful about metaphysics is there is that amazing sense of light within us. There's that place of goodness, that truth of who and what we are. We call it in metaphysics a divine urge, and it's called the urge, the divine urge, because sometimes it likes to say, hello, are you paying attention? This is not who you were created to be. This is why you're miserable. This is why you're unhappy. This is why people are running away from you and other people are chasing you. This is why. This is why everything is broke down and beat up. This is why the headlights are out and the bumpers are messed up and the tires are flat. Hello, are you there? This isn't the way you were designed to live. I've been reading this week some really old, deep spiritual texts, and there's this idea that if we think about those individuals that we sometimes bring to our mind, those great spiritual teachers, the Buddha and Jesus and Krishna and Muhammad and some of the great philosophers, and they speak of these great spiritual ideals. And the author of the book I'm reading right now said, basically, they were going into our humanity. That the way that we live sometimes is inhumane. We live in ways that we were not designed to live. Alienation, loneliness, despair, unhappiness. And sometimes we get there and we are so incredibly stuck in those places. When I finally came off the road and wanted to find some driver's training, I should have done that first. I remember one of my first metaphysical teachers, and I said to her, I was taking classes at that time, I find myself in the midst of an immense challenge. Now, what's important about what I just said is, I find myself in the midst of. Let that resonate for a minute. I find myself in the midst of an immense challenge. And she looked at me and she said, what if the power of spirit looked you directly into your eyes and asked, how will you, even now, especially now, create meaning, create happiness in your world, in your life? What would you say? You see, the thing about driver's training is that it still allows us to get behind the wheel. That's what metaphysical teaching is about. The Buddha, who was around sometime between 800 and 300 BC, was part of a movement in Asia known as the forest monks. And the Buddha came up with a concept. It's interesting, in the meditation this morning, Andy Tureen was talking about Buddhism and the Buddha saying that the key to enlightenment goes through suffering. Now, in metaphysics nowadays, in New Thought metaphysics, sometimes we are kind of repelled by that. But I want to talk about that a little bit. The forest monks that the Buddha became part of while he was still Siddhartha were a group of people who lived out of what they called the householder. Now, when I use the word householder, what comes to mind, right? Okay. Buy me a house, that means that I'm invested in it. I'm invested in this dwelling. I'm invested in this building. So I come up and I decide to put a lawn out front, a lawn that I'm going to mow every once in a while. And I put a driveway in there, and every morning when I get up, I come out and I get in my car in that driveway and I drive away, and I come back at the end of the day, park my car there, go inside. I walk up to the front of that house. I have painted it a certain color. And in a couple of years, I'm going to have to paint it again. And then I go into the house, and now I'm collecting decorations. I'm collecting knickknacks. I'm collecting art. And I painted those walls. And I go in there and I live each and every day. And I am committed to that place. I am invested in that place. And so the forest monks, they said, there's a place in consciousness where we set up shop, where we tend to build a place. And we become attached to it. We become invested in it. We start to decorate it. We put a lawn around it. We mow the lawn. We take care of it. We lock it up. We spend our time there. And so basically there's this idea that we think that we live our lives in this place. And if that place is not working for us, if we are living in that place, if we are invested in that place, if it becomes our definition, if it becomes our meaning, if we begin to develop folklore around it and stories and mythologies, we stay in that place. And what the Buddha discovered when he was Siddhartha and he left the palace, a place that he found stifling and choking to him personally, culturally, spiritually, he moved out into the world, into a place of living in a transitory way. In other words, being willing to let go of that. In the Psalms 23, which we all love so much, my first metaphysical teacher said, Andy, you said to me, you are in the midst of. And she said, let's take a look at the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of. Yea, though I walk through the valley of. Are we willing to move beyond the householder of our suffering to move into a place of journey, a place of moving forward? That's what the Buddha discovered. The Buddha discovered that once he went into the forest with the forest monks, and they traveled about, and they sought out different teachers, and they moved around. They began to challenge the ideas of being stuck somewhere. So where does this come from? Between 800 and 300 BCE, this is an age called the Axial Age. It's an age of incredible enlightenment that took place in the Far East, the Middle East, the Near East, but also began to take place in Eurasia as well. And it was a backlash against something in the world that was known as the caste system, which to some extent still exists today. But the caste system back in those days was, if you were born into a family of laborers, that's what you were going to do the rest of your life. And if you tried to move beyond that you were breaking the law. You could be killed for that. And so royalty was born into royalty, laborers were born into labor. Poverty, if you came from poverty, if you were born into poverty, that's where the law said that you had to stay. But there was this rebellion that came about during this incredible age where people said, wait a minute, what? I have desires. I would like to do something different with my life. I would like to move beyond where I'm at. I'd like to experience something. I'd like to travel somewhere. I'd like to create something. I have these innate talents that are within me. And you all know, you guys have, whether you like music or you like art or you like politics or you like religion, you like to travel, you like to sit put, you like to garden. We all have these things that come up within us of expression, of freedom. And this began to grab the imagination of people during this time. And so the Buddha, Siddhartha, who later became, known as the Buddha, he was living in this time of this great, incredible rebellion that was taking place. And so the forest monks, they referred to the caste system as the householder. In other words, what they figured out was the reason that people stay in the caste system is because they make an agreement to be there. How many of you are familiar with Don Miguel Ruiz and the Four Agreements? And the beauty of his book is he talks about the fact that we actually come into agreement around the maladies that we have. We actually set up shop there. We actually believe that in some cases we should be treated in an inferior way because that's where we find ourselves. In some of the work that I do away from the Center for Spiritual Living, I find people who, for lack of a better term, and I can relate to this myself, for lack of a better term, set up shop or build a house in the place of shame. In other words, and this is kind of the psychology of it, is that somewhere along the line, if I have been abandoned, especially as a child, I've been neglected as a child, I've been traumatized as a child, and I grow up, and because there's maybe nobody there to help guide me through that in some way, shape, or form, psychologically, spiritually, then I can begin to think that it's my identity. I can begin to act in a way that reinforces that. This is where Don Miguel Ruiz says that we have come into agreement with what's happened to us. We have given sanction to it. We have allowed it to become part of our definition, part of our personal belief system, part of who we are. We build a house there. One of the reasons that I was in the midst of an immense challenge back in those days when I first got involved in metaphysics and was taking classes is I had done all this destruction to my life, and I was finally kind of getting it together. I started out in the world of psychology. I was going to therapy. I was going to counseling. I was immersing myself because I knew that I had just really, just run my life into the gutter in so many ways. And so there was something inside me that still wasn't complete. I had been raised in religion, and I had been raised in fundamentalist Christianity, and for me it wasn't a good fit in terms of my personality. And I couldn't wait to run away from that. I wanted nothing to do with it. And it wasn't until, again, I created all this carnage in my life that I began to open up to psychological ideas and then finally to spiritual ideas. So then, in the process of that, I had gone through a divorce, and I had remarried, and I had gotten my children to come live with me. And I thought, life is a panacea. Now, this is all built on what I had learned through therapy and psychology. But I thought, well, life's a panacea. Now I got this all figured out. I have the kids move in, try and put together kind of a blended situation. Steps, I got nothing but respect for steps, man. I'm telling you, stepmoms, stepdads, that's a rough gig. You know what I'm saying? Okay, you're not my real mom. Oh, that's just such a pleasure, isn't it? So, anyway, so we pulled all this together, and this was the angst that I was in, because I was trying to pull my family back together, and it just wasn't working. And so, basically, what she said was, Andy, you're not seeing your life as transitional. You're not seeing your life as a journey. It's interesting to me, if we take the concept, and I don't know how people are going to react to this. If we take the concept, for example, of reincarnation, and for some people, especially people who have come from other religious backgrounds, say Christianity and things like that, the idea of reincarnation, oh man, that's so cool, I mean, because it has built into it this journey situation, right? And so it turns the meaning of life with a capital L into an evolutionary journey, into a process. And so we have this romantic notion about that. But what I found out in the reading I've done is that prior to the axial age, when people began to question things, was that reincarnation was a dualistic idea. In other words, not only was your caste, say, labor in this lifetime, it's been labor forever, and it's gonna be, and that's just where you're gonna, and so, people like Siddhartha and stuff are saying, what's the point? I mean, so what if I get reborn? Because I'm just coming back to the same place. Save my seat for me, keep it warm, because I'm gonna come back, right? And it wasn't until later when some of these great minds came forward in this age and began to explore the deeper spiritual ideas. They say, no, this is the opportunity. But the opportunity exists even within this lifetime. One of my favorite Buddhist writers, Lama Surya Das, says he has a lot of people come up to him and say, oh, tell me about reincarnation. Tell me about where you've been. Tell me about where you're going. And he says, well, to heck with that. Tell me about this lifetime. In all the incarnations you've been in. Take a moment. We got just a couple people here with gray hair, right? Okay. So just think, just think about the incarnations in this lifetime. And think about what came to a close and then what came to a beginning within just this lifetime. Think about the idea of the transitory nature of life. Now today, the title of what I'm talking about is supposed to be New Beginnings. So I want to reflect on something. New beginnings. So we think, new beginnings we can come up in our mind with kind of the archetype of the baby being born, and the baby is born and grows up and lives its life. But what about all the new beginnings within that life? And what does that open us up to? What is the possibility there? Even if things aren't going well. I had an NPR moment, they call them driveway moments, right, in NPR. And I was driving around this week and I heard it was a week or two ago, and there was this little short blurb on there about a woman who had had a brief relationship with a mosquito. And it wasn't altogether satisfactory even, but afterwards she was left with West Nile virus, the challenge of West Nile virus. And so I looked up West Nile virus, and it talks about intense fevers, headaches, vomiting, rashes, nervous system issues, and failings. And she talked about now she had been living her life. Let's put West Nile virus on the back burner for a second. She'd been living her life, grew up, raised in a family, got her education, went to high school, went to some college, fell in love with someone, got married, had some children, manifested a job. She's making a living. But she was just kind of like in this thing of just kind of going along and going along and going along and going along. Every year she had 2 weeks vacation. She got the holidays off. She was attending all the school functions. She was making meatloaf on Wednesday nights. She was feeding the dog. She was feeding the cat. She was going to bed. She was waking up. She's doing the same thing over again. Isn't that a great life? Okay. It is a great life. But anyway, so she gets West Nile virus, and so she's laid up for a long time. And during the time that she's laid up, so we see that there's some suffering there. We see that there's some challenge there because she's laying in a bed and she's looking at 4 walls and she's watching, Price is Right and, and stuff and reading her tablet and, and she begins to reflect on what her life is. Even in the midst of this pain and this suffering, she starts to kind of reflect on things, and she just cracks the door open just a little bit to wonder about possibility and wonder about, is this all there is? What is my meaning? What am I really creating joy in my life? Am I inspired? Do I have a passion for anything? Now, she is someone who discovered laying there, she has a realization of how much she has liked art in her life. She has coffee table books of art. She goes to galleries. She likes hanging around artists. She's inspired by great art. But she never thought she could draw anything. She never thought she could do anything. And suddenly it came to her, it's like, I wonder if I could take this intense love I have for art and maybe try and do it myself. So she asked her husband to pick up a watercolor set and a couple, some paper and stuff. And so she's laying in bed and she begins to play with the watercolor, and she's got some directions there, and maybe she's found something online about watercolor painting. So she adds the water and she dabs the colors and she begins to, she looks out her bedroom window and there's a tree out there, so she's kind of messing around with that, and maybe she paints the window, and maybe she paints the cat in the window as best she can with her brush, blobbing it around. And she begins to, realize that playing with the colors is so amazing and how they come together and create new colors. And it touched something deeply within her. And she began to work on this. And when she started feeling better, when she started feeling better, she, went down to the local someplace, art guild, junior college, whatever, I don't know. See if that helps. Okay. And she starts to mess around with watercolors, and she begins to grow, and she discovers that she has some talent. This middle-aged woman discovers this talent. And then it goes into becoming one of the great passions of her life. And on NPR, she said, "Now, when I sign my paintings, I sign with the Japanese symbol of the mosquito." Isn't that amazing? Where new beginnings come from. That's a reincarnation. Bringing a life without passion and artistic expression to a close. Going through the valley of the shadow of whatever to be reborn as an artist. Excuse me. In our movement, there was a gentleman some years ago named Tom Costa, and Tom Costa was referred to as Dr. Love. He had the Center for Spiritual Living in Palm Desert. That's right. Little tiny guy, stood this big, and he was just wonderful. And I'd heard about him, and I had just become a minister, and I was going down to Asilomar to a conference, and I'd just been a minister a couple of years, and I think the Centers for Spiritual Living kind of threw me a bone this one time. They said, Tom Costa, who's retired and who's been going through cancer treatment, is going to come. He's going to speak at the same chapel where Ernest Holmes did his Sermon by the Sea, and you're going to introduce him. It's like, oh my God, that's so cool. So I met him, and in my mind, he was just bigger than life because he was Dr. Love, and he had this huge center, and people loved him, and he would travel around, and he touched so many people. But here he was, this little tiny guy. It was so cool to meet him, and so we were backstage beforehand, and they had music and prayer and all this other stuff going on. And so he was talking to me, and I had his bio in front of me, and so he's asking me about my background and stuff, and I told him that I had worked in juvenile corrections and parole, and I told him about some of the challenges I went through in my own life and stuff. And he told me that before he got involved in ministry and before he overcame his challenges, he was a bartender. And he said, he says, I think you and I had the same clients at one time. I said, yeah, I think so. We hung around with the same people, man. And that was our tribe, So anyway, I introduced him, and I will never forget what he talked about. He talked about the fact that he had this wonderful ministry for years. First of all, he came from being a bartender and all that entails. So use your imagination there. What was going on both sides of the bar? He got into ministry. That was one reincarnation. Did his ministry. That comes to an end. And then right around the time it comes to an end, they tell him, you have stage 4 cancer. So being the true metaphysician, I love this. So they get him all lined up. He's going to go to the treatment center, get his treatments, radiation, chemotherapy, all that kind of stuff. And so Dr. Tom looked at that and said, I wonder what the opportunity is here. I wonder what the opportunity is here. And he decided that he was going to make that cancer center his new ministry. He wasn't going in there to spread religion or spread a philosophy. He just wanted to go in there to love and hang out and share compassion. And so he did. He ended up making friends with all the other patients, all the doctors, all the nurses. He got through his treatment. They hated to see him go. They threw him a party when he left. They gave him gifts when he left. Patients who were already through, they let patients know so they could come back for the last time he got his treatment. A reincarnation, a new beginning. Something ends, something dies, something new comes out of it. You see, in our culture, we believe that if something ends, then it's time to cry, it's time to let go, it's time to bury it, it's time to fall over. No, it's all a new beginning. That's what it's about. That's what new beginnings are. New beginnings say that at some point we have to practice non-attachment. We have to let it go. What my metaphysical teacher taught me was, Andy, your kids have been through a lot. Life is tough for them. And somewhere within this pain is a new beginning. Somewhere within what you're going through right now is a new healing. And you have to trust that process. You have to get out of your house and become the forest monk. You have to become transitory. You have to be willing to go through, yea, though I walk through the valley of the whatever, I will find the mountaintop. That's where I'm going. All right. I think that's about all I got. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.